Hey guys, welcome to Code Decode. In this video, we are going to look into top 7 REST API mistakes that we as a Java developers do even in 2025. I can see that in many of the projects right today. And doing that, we are just increasing the tech depth of our project. So today in this video, let's see what are those mistakes that we usually many a times do and how we can fix and make them better. So let's get started. The very first mistake that we try to do is to extensively use Java 8 new features, and we are so damned about it that we just start using optional everywhere to prevent the null pointer exceptions. You might be thinking, right, that yes, when you get a request from the user, you don't want to have the null pointer exceptions if the user by mistakenly sent the null data. But in that scenario, you end up using optional in the DTOs or in the request DTOs that you are going to get from the UI. And that is where you do the wrong thing. So let's first see what is optional. So optional is a type in Java that is designed to represent an optional return value from the method, but it is not used in the fields in the POJOs or DTOs. You can always use it as a return type from a method because a method can return you null, and you can handle that return type with is present or if present methods. But it is not initially designed to be used as a part of the DTO fields. Who is responsible for converting this JSON to DTO? The one which is given by default by Spring Boot to you is the default deserializer that is called as Jackson. Now this Jackson has a very poor support for optional field handling in the incoming JSON values, and which often leads to unexpected behavior. Too much of theory, let's understand with an example, okay? Suppose there is a user request coming from the UI. Your front end sends you an email. What if the person while registering sends you an empty email? So what the first thing you say is, oh, I'm using Java 8. I should use new features. Let's put the email as optional of string of email. So whenever if the user sends me an email which is empty in the user details, user request object, I would deserialize it to optional.empty so that I could not get null pointer exception. Thought process correct. Utilization very bad. What you could have rather done is, you would have just used string email, and during the handling of this email in the controller, you could validate it if email is not null or is empty. I mean, that is an old logic, but not using optional. Why would I say don't use optional here? Because when you write in this particular format, when you get a request like this, that email should be test@example.com, you would convert this JSON into the Java object called as user DTO or the user request. And who does it for you? Who converts this JSON to this POJO? By default, Jackson is the one who does this conversion of JSON to DTO object or the Java object. Now the problem is this Jackson is an internal default deserialization given out of the box by Spring Boot to you. And it is a very poor designed implementation who cannot handle optional at all for you. So if your JSON looks like this, the Spring may not fill this email field at all in your POJO. And if it is not filled up, it will be null for you. So it might just leave it empty and as if the user never sent it, even though you sent something. But since it is not able to call the setter method of this, because of this optional implementation, it will make it null. So Jackson is very good at converting simple regular data types like string, int, boolean, list, map, custom classes. But it is very bad with the optional part. So if you have a user details object, a user request object as private string email, and then you have a getter and setter, it works perfectly fine. Because you give this JSON to it, email, with this email, it calls the setter method. So the set email is called with this particular value, and your user request or user details object is perfectly filled. But as soon as you write an optional to this field, you are in trouble. Because Jackson doesn't know how to turn a string into an optional of string. Jackson sees email is test@email.com in JSON, but your Java object expects an optional. Now Jackson is not smart enough by default to wrap this value to optional.off of this value. So what Jackson does do? It tries to find a converter. But you have not customized or optimized for it. So it skips the field and set it to null. So your getter returns optional.empty, which means that it looks like user has not sent anything to you. But that is not the truth. User has sent this particular JSON to you. But since you are handling it in the wrong way, you are trying to get it in the optional field, which Jackson doesn't understand and sends you null. This getter returns you an optional of empty, and you sees, oh, the user has not sent it. So what Jackson sees, okay, this is a JSON. But what you want is an optional of this. But Jackson cannot automatically convert this into optional of this. So it sends you null, and hence you get optional.empty as a result. And that is where the mismatch comes, that the user says, oh, I have filled the email in the form. You are not able to fetch it. And you would say, oh, I have it a very beautiful Java 8 implementation where there's option to handle the nulls, and that is why I'm prevented from null pointer exception, because I've used option, which is a very wrong thing you do. So how do you fix it? Better just use string email without any optional conversions. Optional is only for the method return type, not for your DTOs to handle the fields from inputs. If you just make it as a common custom or the existing class type like string, Jackson maps it correctly. And you can add this code like email not equals to null or email that blank, then you're good to go. Or you can use not blank, that is the custom validators. Now you would come to me and ask, okay, the problem is the bottleneck in the problem is Jackson. So can't you force Jackson to handle this optional string rather than doing it in the legacy way of not using optional? Yes, you can do it, but it's an extra work and it is not recommended for DTOs. What you could have rather done this is you could register a custom Jackson module to handle the optional fields, or you can write a custom deserialization for every optional field. But that is a lot of work and your Java was never meant to do it. Just this single line will help you fixing your stuff. So what happens is, why Jackson failed? Because there is no built-in method for deserialization and Jackson accepts string and not optional string, and hence results in optional.empty. So even though your logic was meant to handle the missing emails, you actually end up always having the empty emails. And you will always think, why my email is always missing even when client is clearly sending it to me. So the right way is, in the user request, you send a string. And in the controller, you just check like whether it is blank or not, or it is null or not. If it is, then send the request entity as body, say with the body saying that email is required. Otherwise, you go and create the user object. Even better way to not using this if-else condition in the controller and make it cumbersome and removing the single responsibility from it to just handle the request and doing validation also, you can do validations externally. On the user details object itself, over the email, you just say not blank and send a message that email is required. So now when you do @valid over this particular user request, whenever this email is trying to be mapped by Jackson, Jackson says, oh, it has to be validated first. So it tries to validate, the Spring tries to validate it for you and says, okay, the user details object has null email and it is marked as not blank or not null. Then I should send this email is required in the body to the user. And this is a beautiful way of handling the blank, not null, min, max, all kind of validations using validated over your controllers. So what you should not do, you should not use optional in DTOs. Rather, you should just keep it simple with the primitives or the custom or the wrapper data types. You can rely on optional for JSON fields. You should not do that. Rather, you should use null and validate manual or annotation-based validations rather for the acceptance of the user request. You should not assume Jackson can internally handle conversion of your objects to the optionals. It cannot do that. It is not that much matured enough. So Jackson should handle the simple data types the best. You should not rely on it. So that was the first mistake that we do using optional in your user acceptance DTOs. The second most recurrent issue that you can find in the code is, which works. The code will not give you any exception or error, but it is a bad way of coding. That is, you are exposing your internal entities in the API response. So what happens is, what is the JPA entity? The JPA entity, like user, is your database model. It often contains all the database specific table fields, which can include the sensitive data like passwords also. It can also have relationships like roles, addresses, and all those things which are personal to the particular user, and you should not expose it like that. It can have even internal audits and logs and internal application stuff like when was this created, where it is now at the temporary location created, and so on. So you should not expose these database specific data to your users. So what mistake you do is when you try to create a controller and a get method, like get with the get mapping, you directly call the user repository.findAll. And what you return is a list of user, and this user is actually annotated with @entity, which is very bad. What you can rather do is you can create a user DTO and then map that user DTO to user and save it in database. And while you fetch it from the database, you can again use the mapstrut or mapper to convert it from user DTO to user, from user to user DTO, and return that user DTO to your UI. And that user DTO should not have sensitive fields like passwords in the database when it was created. It should have only those fields which is actually required by our UI people, and it does not contain any raw database entities which should not be returned to the front end. So why this is bad? If you use this entity as the output or the response entity, it leaks the sensitive data like password, tokens, and all those things. It can lead to infinite recursion. Now this is a very big topic to discuss. I will not discuss this in this video, but I'll just give a gist of it. If your user has a list of orders into its dependency, and this order has the user, like who has actually placed this order, this gives you an infinite loop. It gives you a circular dependency. And the JSON deserializer or serializer may loop forever to find the user for this list of orders. And this list of orders actually belongs to which user. So in the table, it gives you infinite recursion and you are in too much of trouble. Also, it leaks the internal details like audit logs and system IDs. Also, it is very hard to refactor because if there is a change in the entity, your front end will break. Why? Because you are adding or removing something from your entity or the table, or you rename the column name, your front end will be broken, which is a very bad thing to do. Your front end and your back end should be loosely coupled. So this gives you an entire internal file of your back end to the front end or the users, who only needs the summary, who does not need when your database entry was created, when it is updated. So it is too much of extra information that you're giving to them. So rather the solution is to use DTOs. Now these DTO are custom Java classes that defines exactly what data you need to send to the client, no more, no less. Do not send them extra database specific data. Do not send them extra tokens, user IDs, passwords. They already have it. The user must already know what is their password. So don't send them, and don't abuse this particular network bandwidth to be used by hackers to get the user details out of you. So the best way to use the data transfer objects, which exactly define what data to be returned, you can use manual mappers or you can use Mapstrut, which is an existing library which converts your entities to DTO, because this is a common issue and every 90% of the enterprise application faces this, and hence they use these DTOs. So what you do is in the service layer, you call the repository. Again, this is the wrong way to do it. You could first use the service layer and then use the repository layer. But worst case, you want to keep it very short. You can do find all, but after doing the find all, don't return the user details as it is. You first map those user details to the user DTO objects and then collect those and return as the user DTO object list to the user rather than just returning the entity. Why this is good? Because you have control over the data. You only send what you need to send. It is also secure. So even if the hacker tries to look into this network, it will only see the insensitive data like email or name, which will be of no use to him. It is also safe from recursion issues because the recursion issues occurs in the entity relationships. This is just the DTO. It does not have to look into tables for this. Also, it is flexible because if you change anything in the backend, the only thing that you need to change is the mapping or the Mapstrut mapping, and your DTO will remain as it is and your front end will not be broken. So the bonus tip is you can use Mapstrut, the mapper or the model mapper. Instead of writing this whole code base, you can just use this mapper who maps your user to your user DTO and opposite also. And then you can just use this mapper and return that list of user DTO to your user. So this big code here is now just converted to only one single line of code by using mapper or the Mapstrut. I always prefer using this. So the second issue that you are doing is you are using the entities as a response entities, which you should never do. The third is incorrect HTTP status codes. Now first, What is HTTP status codes? The HTTP status codes are like signals from a backend to your front end or the mobile applications or the API consumers. So if you send the wrong HTTP status code, you give a wrong traffic signal that, okay, it is green, please go ahead. But actually it was false. It was 400 or 401, but you didn't handle the HTTP status code properly. You just copy pasted the code or gave the wrong status code, and you give the wrong traffic signal to your client that go ahead or stop or wait for some time, it will be open, and so on. So HTTP status codes are nothing, in a technical way, a contract between your server and your client. Misusing them leads to a poor developer experience and makes the client logic unreliable, and the client will be confused like what is actually happening. So these are some kind of HTTP codes. For example, 200 OK means everything is fine. Please go ahead and use my data. Or give me the data, I'll save it. 404 says, sorry, the resource is not on me. 409, there is a conflict with the current state and the state that you are trying to process. 422 is unprocessable entities, indicating many validation errors. The mistake that you do is, in the response entity, you say is response entity.ok, but the user is not found. Rather, what you would have done is 404 not found, the user not found. But since you send response entity.ok, you did not know that it will internally send 200 OK, which means everything is well. But your message says user is missing. So the status and message does not match. Client will not know whether the user is found or not, or it is really okay and user is found. Please go ahead and modify this user. So rather you use the proper status code. For example, you find by ID and you map it to OK. If there is an exception, the or else will map it to HTTP status not found. And this is a beautiful way of handling the optionals also. Or the third option is you can throw a custom exception. If you don't want to just send the HTTP not found and you want proper message to be sent in a proper exception handling way, then you can create your own custom class which extends the runtime class, and you override the constructor with the message, and during the creation of exception, you just throw new user not found exception and send the message which will override the runtime exception, and your exception will properly show the user defined message as user not found. And because you have annotated this exception, custom exception with this response entity of HTTP status not found, it will make sure that it automatically returns 404 with your proper message that you add here. So this is a beautiful way of handling the errors and not just sending anything that you want with a wrong user message. So there should never be a conflict between HTTP status and messages. This HTTP status is such a small thing that it is usually overlooked by the developers. It will not cause any compilation error, runtime error, but this is a bad coding practice with REST APIs. The fourth problem is not using problem details. Now with Spring Boot 3 in picture, and most of us are trying to move to Spring Boot 3. This Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6 gives a built-in support for a class called as problem details, which is a structured way of returning the error response from your REST APIs or the controllers. Now you would say, why problem details if I have response entity already with me? So I would say yes, response entity is a way to send a response to the client. But problem details is a specific way of sending only errors to the client. So yes, response entity is a Spring class which represents a full HTTP response. The status, headers, body, whether it is 200 or 400, each and everything. But problem detail is a structured error payload which is following some specifications of Spring 6 and is only for standardization of error responses and not of any response success or error. So yes, you can return any customized response entity. Here in the problem details, there is 4 structure which is to be given, that is title, status, type and all. But yes, you can still customize and give your own JSON key and value to it. Is it a standardized format? No, it depends on what you put in the body. It is not standardized, while this problem details is a standardized way. Spring Boot 3 Plus always supports, be it 3 or 2 or 1 response entity is always there. But this problem details come only and only with Spring Boot 3. And the purpose, this is a general purpose response wrapper, the response entity. But the problem details is a specialized error reporting POJO or the object view. Now coming to the use case of it. Spring Boot 3 has added a built-in support for problem details POJO, which is a structured way of handling the error responses. It is not just a common throw new error kind of thing. Rather, it's a standardized way which gives you a proper support for status, title, detail, type, and even custom properties. So how it works? What you can do is on your global exception handler, when you have the exception handling done at the method level, and when you catch some custom exception like user not found exception, so rather than returning a simple plain string that user not found, you can create your own problem detail object, and you can set title, detail, type, and everything on it, and set it to the human readable format, and your sample output will then looks like this beautiful thing. It is a proper JSON which says type is this, title user not found, status is 404, and details is that user with ID 123 is not found. It is a specific message. Now you would ask me, what is this type? Title is understandable, what is a summary? Status is obviously the HTTP status. Details is a specific message. But this type is not something which I can understand from what it is. So this type is actually a URL for some meaningful type. So what is this type? Think it as a ID or the category of what the problem is. What is this URL? It's actually a URL. So it gives you a standard name or standard URL. If one of the system sees it, they exactly know what went wrong without you giving a vague message. Or you can make this a link URL where you click on that URL and you get the more understanding of what it actually is all about. So what you can do is you can either keep it blank, saying that understand what is the issue with this title and details. I'm not giving you any extra more documentation about why the user was not found or how you can add this user to the detail. So use this when you don't want to define a custom type. The second option is, which is a recommended option, is that you create your custom URL with a specific kind of error that your API has this particular user not found documentation where you click and says, okay, if this user is not found, you can go, these are the steps to register yourself, and then this issue of user not found will not come. So this is the documentation of this particular error or exception which you usually get into the system, and you have the troubleshooting for it. So hey, it tells the client, hey, this is a well-known error for our system. This means that you are not a valid user, you are not registered into the system. You can check this particular URL, go into this page, it will give you all the steps to troubleshoot and get yourself into the system, so that next time you again hit with me, you will not get 404, rather you will be registered with us. So what you can do is you can add a unique error ID like myapp.thispage, which is a URL, and going to this URL gets you into proper documentation. And on that documentation, you can give the steps like what you can do this, do that, do this. So this is for repeated errors. But if it is simple generic issue, you can keep it as blank. So that was all about the type in this problem details object. So what is the benefit of this using problem details object? This problem details object is machine readable and human friendly. Even you can use this problem detail to send the proper error response to your consumers. So the old bad way is to return the new error or exception. Rather, you can return the problem details. This new error was not structured and it was hard to document and debug and understand what happened. But this is a proper format with a proper title, status, details, and standardized and consistent way of handling the errors by front end also. So that was the fourth bad thing that you do, that you just return a simple string saying user not found, or you return a throw new exception and a message to it. That is a bad way. Rather, what you can do is you can return a problem detail only in case of error exceptions. The fifth issue is you do not version your APIs. 90% of us do not have the habit of versioning our APIs. Now imagine your app is up and running and there are multiple users to it. You have desktop users, you have mobile users, you have multiple front end, even some other services. Now if you want to change some fields for your mobile applications but not for your desktop applications, then you have to either create another different UI, different API, change the fields there and give the new URL to your front end, which is bad. Because now you have to maintain two different APIs for the same thing, just because some few fields were different for desktop and mobile apps. Rather, what you can do is just version them as V1 and V2. V1 has the same thing, old desktop applications and old APIs can use it. The V2 is the new way of handling only the mobile APIs or the mobile apps. So if you want to change, add new fields, remove old fields, change somehow the API, and if you don't version it, any breaking change will break the existing desktop applications also. You cannot evolve safely and it will create chaos across your desktop apps and other services that there is a change in the API. We have to manage and handle it. So this is a mistake of giving the get user API as just slash users, because there is no versioning to it. If you want to change this response later on, say adding some new fields or something, you are stuck. Your other clients might break and you are stuck with maintaining the same fields forever. So rather what you can do is you can use API slash v1 slash users and v2 slash users. v1 will keep on handling the old limited logic with the old desktop sites and other services. v2 will be a whole new API with a beautiful logic and more fields and can be easily handled by all the users, mobile users. Later on, when the old people are good and okay to migrate, they can always use the new functionality that we have implemented in v2. This is how you make sure that your old version is not broken and your new version is also up and running all the time. So now you can support both the old clients, outdated ones, and you can handle the new clients who are happy to modify their code and migrate to the new beautiful changes that you have done. Why this is so great? This will help you in maintaining your clients and understand and choose which version to use. It will prevent the backward compatibility from broken, and the older users can still use your app without any errors when they don't want to migrate and they just want to be happy with what they have. Evolution is very safe. You can innovate and give this innovation to people who are ready to innovate also, and just keep yourself in the old static way for old people. If you are using Swagger, there's a beautiful opportunity to group also. So if there is a client who is the desktop applications, you can give all the v1 Swagger contract to them, and you can group them as v2 for all the new migrated clients like mobile apps to use. And these are the APIs. These are the 5 APIs who are v2 APIs, and now you can use them and migrate yourself and start using the new beautiful modifications that we have done. So this is how you can group the APIs as v1 and v2 and just give this v1 to the old people and v2 to the new consumers. So in the Swagger UI, you will see drop down as v1 and v2. If an old non-migrated one, I'll keep on using the old contract of v1. But if I'm the mobile application, I want to use the new and enhance my UI seamlessly, I can start using v2 as a version and use the segregated Swagger contracts also. There is a way how you can version. You can version based on URL. You can version on the headers. You can give the versioning as the query param. And there is one more way which is very complex, that is to use in the complex of producers and consumers with the content and negotiations. The URL based is the most common and most forwarded way. Even the URL based versioning can be based on your root level or on the API level. So suppose you have a get mapping, post mapping, you can do it on that level also. But this URL based is something which is very common across all the REST APIs. So fifth part was not versioning your APIs is the very bad thing to do. Even if you are starting to write a code, you start with versioning v1, because going forward there will be for sure some changes and then you will be in trouble. The sixth very important thing that you don't do, 90% of we don't do, is if we are the source of data to some other APIs, you don't tell them how much time they can cache our data. They always have to come back to us, find a person, developer in the team and says, is your data cacheable? And if it is cacheable, how much time I can cache your data? For example, you have the product details. Say, I have an iPhone. Its description is iPhone Pro Max. Its battery life is this and it is expiring 2026. So if it is, I'm in 2025, I can easily cache this data for 1 year because it is not going to expire till then, or at least for a month. So you can decide your data can be cached for X number of time and you are the best one to do that. So when you're giving response back to the client, why not give this in the header? And there's a way to do that. That is with a cache control header. This cache control header, while sending the response entity, you can send the cache control header saying that you can store or cache my data for 60 seconds or 30 days. And this is how beautifully you can tell your consumers that you don't have to come to me and ask how much I can do it. I am itself, whoever is coming to me, I am giving you explicitly that I am cacheable and you can cache me for this much time. This is a beautiful caching thing you can do. And 90% of us don't do it. But there's also one more way called as e-tags. And the good thing is you can do simultaneously both the timing cache and e-tags together. Let's first understand why. So many APIs returns the data that do not often change. For example, the product data, the application configurations, or the static data lookup, like what all states are there in this country. So if you want to get a drop down for how many states are there in the country, it's not going to change. So you can cache it. You don't have to always hit my application, get the 100 states from out of my country and show it to your damn drop down. What you can rather do is you can add the cache headers. If you don't do it, they will keep on calling your APIs again and again. Even if there is nothing changed, you will end up giving 100 countries for that particular 100 city or the state for that particular country. And you will waste a lot of bandwidth, CPU, database queries, cost, money, everything. So the mistake that you're doing is you're not giving them by yourself that you can cache me as a header information. So how you can fix it? You can use e-tags. What is e-tag? E-tag is an entity tag, which is a unique ID for your response body. So if the content has not changed, the client says, if none match XYZ, the response is 304. Too much of theory, let's understand with the code. So there is a way to filter register bean where you have the shallow e-tag header filter. With this, you set the filter and you add this URL pattern and then you return the filter, which is a e-tag filter. Now string automatically hash the response and add this e-tag header automatically. So now Spring automatically adds this e-tag header and responds if there is no change to it. For example, let's understand with a practical example. It is too difficult to understand, and that is why 90% of us do the manual caching. Even I prefer the manual caching rather than the e-tags. But this is a beautiful approach. Even I would try it. That is, suppose you give you give a request that give me the n number of cities or countries for states for this particular country. Initially, the first time when you are trying to hit this particular get API for the first time, the response says 200. Okay, this is your unique identified e-tag, that is ABC123, and these are the 100 states for one country that you are asking for. Next time again you try to send this again, saying, hey, please give me the states for this particular country, and if none match, this is the e-tag that you have given before to me. The server says, okay, in my database, these are still the 100 states for one country that you are asking for. So 304 not modified. It saves this body transfer of 100 states because this is already with you. The previous time you tried hitting it, you got the response. You already have the response. Don't ask me again. There is no change. The only thing that you need to do is, while giving a request to the server, you send this e-tag you have previously received from the server. So now it understands, okay, you are uniquely identified as the consumer and there is no change to it. So you save your bandwidth, improve your performance, and just show the latest data you have in your cache. There is no change to it. So this is beautiful way of e-tagging your each request by the server. The second way is that I've told you, explicit caching control. This is time-based caching control. It adds the header to the response that, okay, this is a request that you asked for. This is a response. This is a product detail, and you can cache me for 30 days. So now the browsers will cache for 60 days or the 30 days or 60 seconds, whatever you send it in the header, and it will not ask the server again, and rather it will cache it itself and use the cached version. Now the question you will ask me is, can I use both e-tag and cache control? Yes, you can do that. E-tag will tell you, okay, there is no change. But cache control will tell you, don't ask me until your time expires. So suppose this static data of country and state not being changing for 1 year, but you made the cache control for 60 days. After 60 days, it will ask you, is there any change? If you give the e-tag to the server, the e-tag will be matched to your previous request and says there is no change. So I'm not going to send you 100 requests again. And you can again go ahead and cache it for next 60 days or 30 days. And after that 60 days, you can come again to me and ask me, is there any change? So yes, you can use both e-tag and cache control together. If it is very difficult to understand, let me know in the comment section. I'll create a very separate video for this REST API based e-tags and cache control handling. Trust me, 99% of us don't do that. If you do it, let me know what was your use case, and I'll be very happy to understand where did you use these e-tags and cache control. The seventh, last, and the most common thing that we do is you doing the fat controllers too much. What is the single responsibility principle that you learn in the solid principle? That is, keep it simple and don't overload your one single class with n number of responsibilities. If one single class is a responsibility of handling your user request as a dispatcher servlet, don't add your business logic to it. That is, your controllers has a single responsibility of handling your user request. So all your business logic is added to the separate class, give a call to the separate class, keep it simple, keep it segregated and loosely coupled, and do not give much of the responsibility to your controller, who is only responsible for handling your user request and not your transformation, validation, persistence, and all XYZ kind of logic to it. So the mistake that you do is when you get a request to create the user, you check whether it's not null. So this is the first exception that you do. Don't do validations here. Create the validations in @validated method in your Pojo and do the validations here. Just give a call to it. Don't do all the kind of validations here. The second thing you do is you create a new user and you save it in the database with the repository. This part has to be done in a different class called a service class. In the third or fourth point also, I have told you that is a bad way of calling the user repository from your controller. That is to be the task of the business or the service layer. From here, you should just send what the user service sends you the response to. So how beautiful you could have done is give the validation responsibility to your DTO, give the saving of the data to the repository to the user service, and you just keep it the 2 line of code. That is, get the request from the request body and send the response back to the user. That is what your controller is meant to do, while your service layer can do the business logic. This improves the separation of concern and testability and gives you a better solid principle implementation of this S. That is, keep it separated, don't overload your controller layer. And that is the 7th mistake that you do in the REST APIs with your controllers, to overload your controller with validations, with service layer logic, with persistence logic, and all those things. Don't do that. The final thought is, in standing here today, if you're still writing the APIs in the older way, not using problem details, not using single responsibility principle, not using cache headers, not using E tags, not using API versioning, not doing proper HTTP status code handling, not using Mapstrat or DTO objects and returning the entities, and if you're still using optional in your DTOs, you are doing wrong. Think about it, fix it up. Don't increase the tab depths of your projects. Build your application in a much better way using these clean, safe, and scalable APIs. Start using them now in your project, and that will give a very beautiful benefit to you, and you will be able to see it. Let me know in the comment section if you want to know more about these hacks for REST APIs and Spring Boot applications. Thank you.